Thank you, Andre Foutu, for joining Canadians for Safe Technology, a nonprofit organization whose members work with communities and all levels of government to raise awareness about creating healthier communities for children and families across Canada. We are truly looking forward to hearing about the remarkable work you have done to raise awareness about smart meters and the adverse impacts wireless technology can have on vulnerable and sensitive people, as well as the environment and everyone. Andre's topic tonight is correcting public misinformation, politics and mitigation, including ground currents and healthier home environments. Andre Foutu is editor and publisher of Quebec-based. Andre, can you let us know the title of that?
Well, 21st Century Housing Magazine in English, but it's La Maison du 21e siècle.
Beautiful, thank you. And this magazine is what he founded in 1994. Andre holds a bachelor degree in political science, a diploma in communications, and a graduate diploma in journalism. He was a reporter at the Montreal Gazette. In 1988, he specialized in healthy and sustainable housing for 5 years at the weekly Habitat Beck, where he became close to many scientists who published leading-edge research and consumer publications on healthy housing, notably for the chemically hypersensitive. He later translated to French the attached report produced in the late 1990s by Andrew McCroskey of PACE, who contracted by CMHC Survey of Electromagnetic Field Levels in Canadian Housing. It was never published officially by CMHC, whose management found EMF science too controversial. Magnetic fields were classified as possibly carcinogenic in 2002. He has been covering the health effects, politics, and mitigation of EMFs since 1993. His English articles and publications on EMFs are read worldwide, notably Smart Meters, Correcting the Gross Misinformation. Thank you so much, Andre, for joining us this evening. And you may screen share and begin your presentation.
Thank you very, very much, Shelley, and everyone for having me. It's a great honor, a great privilege and pleasure to be here with you tonight. You mentioned advocacy. Before I start, I want to say it rings a bell. You know, I'm from a family of politicians, judges, lots of lawyers. So justice is really in my background, but I'm a reporter above all. So I'm not an activist. Though I was flushed after 15 years of freelancing with De La Presse Montreal Daily, because they call me an activist. A new boss said that in 2004. And it bothered me, but that's the price I guess I have to pay. But my job is to look for the truth and try to be as credible as possible, finding credible sources. So if we begin, perspective on 30 years, actually, I found my oldest article dates back to 1989. So it's nearly 35 years. Before we begin, I must thank Frank Clegg, who several years ago in 2014, nearly a decade ago, backed a symposium, the production of this DVD, which I slashed the price. It's still in our boutique. We had David Carpenter, Paul Leroux, Dominique Bellepomme, and Magda at McGill to talk about EHS. So it was really another historic moment in my I won't say brilliant, but my career. I can say that, you know, it's really a privilege to speak to all the experts out there. And the requests Shelley sent me, and I'm going to try to answer all these questions. You know, we'll have a section on ground currents, and I decided to do like a chronological presentation, mostly with a few exceptions of what I published and what the news from year to year, what important news and papers came out, and how I got in contact with the people who are chemically and electrically sensitive. And you'll have tons and tons. My goal is to give you tons of resources. You probably have most of them, but if people want to go to their elected officials and physicians, it's important to have all these references. So I have 45 minutes and 120 slides. So I'm going to try to go pretty quickly. And to answer question number 4, how to effectively communicate with all levels of government, the public, the media, as I said, is to be credible, to have solid sources. And be you a citizen or a reporter or elected politician, you have to do your homework. You have to double, triple check. We don't always have time, but that's really the key. And unfortunately, reporters in the mass media, exceptions being, Wendy Mesley and others, they don't have time and they're not really encouraged to, as you know, to talk about this hot issue, as the telecom industry owns most of the mass media, unfortunately, but we can work around that. And I want to really tip my hat to all you activists out there. I'm not an activist, but I think a lot of them are using the information that I try to share. And it all started in the summer of '88 when I, fresh out of journalism school, I was an intern at the Gazette. And one day parents called because their daughter had leukemia and she was dying and she never got her bone marrow transplant. Unfortunately, it was really sad for Danielle Hébert. And I was really moved. Here I am, 15 pounds overweight and chronic backaches. To me, protecting your health is the first thing. And wondering how can children develop leukemia? I was really flabbergasted. And that's when I started looking,
Andre, that
yeah.
is a very moving story. Would you be able to use your presentation mode so it takes up more of the full screen so everyone can see?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
This is a very moving presentation. So if you can do that, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So July '88, and I'm wondering, I quickly learned that child cancer is highly dependent on genetics, more than adult cancer. But certainly, even in '88, we already had research showing that pesticides and magnetic fields were suspected. So that's how it all began. This is my first article in Habit, Quebec. And Gilles Thériault, the study that Paul Héroux participated in among electrical workers, Quebec, Ontario, and France. That was my first article. And Hydro-Quebec downplaying, of course, the chap at Hydro saying, I'm a grandfather, if this was dangerous, I'd want to protect my grandkids. Don't you worry. And soon discovered Dr. Becker's book, really the pioneer orthopedic surgeon who was twice nominated for the Nobel Prize. You have to read his books. And to me, it really began on the chemical side because I was very close to Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation scientists. And in 1990, there was this report by a physician in BC, Dr. Barron, about 40 of his patients who, lo and behold, how surprising, their health improved when they cleaned up their house just by removing the skunks chemical, but of course, excess humidity, increasing the off-gassing of VOCs from building materials, and also the mold problem, of course, that we have to take care of in our homes. I'm having problems with my slides here. Here we go. Okay. My first source was really microwave news, which I was reading when I was studying journalism at Concordia and writing for the Concordia newspaper afterwards. Lou Slesson is really the giant out there, recognized by, Washington Post and New York Times and all that. So his research, his articles are always rock solid. He's the best source we could quote anytime. And I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Bill Ray twice, once in Montreal, another time in Brussels, where Dr. Belpom invited me. And his 1991 study, provoking symptoms, it's difficult. Ethically, it's delicate, and he had really an amazing protocol where they had a clean environment and calming the nervous system of the people for a few days. And he really proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he could provoke and provoke the symptoms in electrosensitive people. And Dr. Carpenter, we've had a long-standing relationship with David Carpenter, known him since 1992, writing about how his New York Power Lines project, 5 years, $5 million, the New York State mandated David to oversee, fund different studies, including the Savitz study, which in 1983, I'm sorry, confirmed the 1979 Wertheimer and Leeper study about the link between child leukemia and power line. Wire codes back then, they weren't measuring the levels of magnetic fields. And in Montreal, for me, and it started in 1993, where an upscale West End neighborhood, Côte Saint-Luc, you see this white tower that Hydro-Quebec moved more closely to the homes. And even in 1993, a lot of people were around the world were worried about these power lines, and their kids, of course, playing in the backyard, in the bedrooms, very close. And what's really interesting, and this is, it's really discouraging for the activists because things don't move very fast. But in Côte Saint-Luc, what I found, even with cell towers, when people have money, when there are lawyers involved threatening to sue, well, the utilities and the telecoms, they do listen, and they move the power lines, and they move the cell towers, or they implant them in neighborhoods where people aren't as militant. So it's a shame, because if you don't have money and power, you're probably going to have more exposure. But Hydro did back off, and I was writing for 15 years, as I said, about 100 articles for La Presse. And here I'm writing how one of my sources were saying EMFs feed disease. They may not cause it, but they're going to feed it, because they're harming your immune system and other systems that help you recover and fight cancer and other diseases. And CMHC did a lot of research, and what they found, they did a lot of publications because people feel better when they clean up the home environment, as I said. I actually worked on getting the Ottawa General to accept to have the research house for the chemically sensitive in their backyard. So Hydro did move the line in Côte Saint-Luc in 1994. This is really important. 1995, the NCRP, this is the scientific advisors of the federal government in the US, saying they should have a national standard, 2 milligauss, that we should not be exposed to chronically, let's say 4 hours a day, or 24-hour average, daily average of 2 milligauss, because it's at 3 and 4 milligauss at the childhood leukemia risk doubles. Of course, this was never adopted, but it's historic. It's very important to keep into consideration. What Paul Leroux at McGill, who's a physicist who teaches the toxicology of EMFs, he recommends a below 1 milligauss chronic exposure level. Same thing with the building biologists for long-term, especially in the bedrooms, but children daily should be below 1 milligauss. Because Paul sees how leukemia cells under his microscope start moving and having changes at 0.25 milligauss. So how do you avoid 2 milligauss? Well, these are the distances according to Hydro-Quebec, up to 200 meters for the most powerful 735 kilovolt lines. But of course, if it's not the high tension power lines, it's your local distribution line that feeds into your home. But most of the time, it'll be your electrical panel, which will give off the highest exposure. It's really in your house generally, unless you have a primary distribution line feeding directly into your home. So there's a lot of things we can do. I'm going to go quickly, but Safe Living Technologies has switches that you can, you know, when I turn off my last lamp in my bedroom, when everything is shut off, there's no voltage in my wires because I have one of these switches from SLT. So magnetic fields are when you're consuming electricity, when there's current amperage. But when you stop consuming, when something is plugged into the wall and you have voltage, the tension, that's when you get the electric field. So the electric field is a big problem because it's there 24/7 and it goes right into the middle of your bedroom. So in the middle of your bed, of course, this is my only French slide, but just to show that the electric fields are all over the place, as opposed to magnetic fields, which are, you can just get rid of by shutting devices off. So in my office, we opened the ceiling below my office to replace the wiring, the Romex wiring, which has PVC shielding. So we put in this BX commercial cable, the aluminum or steel shielding around these commercial cables, block the electric field. So my chair is right above this cable, so it's very important. We measure my body voltage with a building biologist. That's why we drilled holes in the gypsum and we just plugged them afterwards. So it's a matter of a few hours to fix. Yeah, thank you, Mike. And so SLT is, of course, across North America is the source for different measurements, your meters for low and high frequency measurements, but also different shielding devices, paints and what have you. So this is the kind of shielding you can just plug into your computer and other devices. And I had a lot of fun with Dr. Cardinal of Hydro-Quebec because in 1995, when McGill published their study, the cancer link with electrical workers, Hydro, I was told, took 4 months to prepare the press release. And all of the mass media just took the release and they published it without asking questions. They wrote, "No excess cancer risk among electrical workers." Well, everyone knew we had to look for leukemia and brain cancer. So some of them did have higher leukemia and brain cancer rates, but they looked at the general picture, and especially the French media, unfortunately, did not do their job. And there was a big problem with Paul Héroux, who decided the dosimeter that the workers wore at work, he decided to add a third channel. In Ontario, the electric fields were linked, I believe, to higher leukemia risk. It was Dr. Anthony Miller who did this study. So he's really one of the top world scientists, World Health Organization advisor. So that was a big problem. But in Quebec, the third channel was with dirty electricity, high frequency transients. So Paul Héroux did not ask permission to measure dirty electricity. And what did he found? Well, 7 times more lung cancers in the most highly exposed Hydro-Quebec workers. So they didn't really like those results. And Dr. Cardinal said, well, Gilles Thériault was an irresponsible scientist for publishing those results without knowing what the source were. They claimed it was CB radios that were giving off the dirty electricity or interference. And but we know that it's on the wiring, of course, also. So as a young reporter, I was flabbergasted, and I put this in the headline that Hydro-Quebec accuses Gilles Thériault of being irresponsible. Well, Gilles Thériault did not speak to me for a few years, and La Presse did an article about this controversy, and the chap at Hydro said that he never told me those words. I didn't record them, but he didn't know what to do, so he just said, I invented the quote, of course. That's the last resort. Well, say the reporter just lied. So that's what happens once in a while. The only time actually it happened in my career that I was accused of lying or of inventing a quote. So here's Andrew Mikrowski's paper, which you can find at the cmhc.ca on their website. And then at the bottom of the homepage, or any page, I think, you can go down to their library. And then if you type in survey of electromagnetic fields carrying housing, you can download his paper. And I want to thank Andrew McCroskey. I think he was the first scientist to tell me about EMFs. Andrew is a doctor of architecture based in Ottawa. He co-founded the Planetary Association for Clean Energy, and his wife has essentia.ca, selling products and books and what have you. So I'm going to go very quickly because I have too many slides, but my PDF is available to everyone to read carefully. So I'll just go quickly over these. But the most important thing for electricians or people who do their wiring, just respect the electrical code. If you don't make wiring errors, you have a great start. And the best book, very down-to-earth, hands-on book, only about 50 pages, Carl Riley's, my slide, I don't have the full title actually. It's removing EMFs, I think, correcting EMFs in building wiring and grounding. I'm sorry, I cut off the top of it, the headline. So you asked me to talk about ground currents. We just published a big story by Jean Hudon about a chap in Quebec who's very sick. It's unfortunate because utilities are responsible. Magda Havis published about this. There was supposed to be a law in Ontario and they backed off. They're asking municipalities, that's the last resort, as New Hampshire is doing with cell towers. They're passing the buck to municipalities, unfortunately. But it's a problem with the utilities. We can fix part of the problems with the grounding on the water pipes. But we know the cows are dying because of this here in France under the wind turbines. And there was a big, lots of science reports and news reports in France. And very recently, what happened? Well, the farmer just went bankrupt, 2 of them. So it was never fixed, but there was a scientific report saying, a National Assembly and a scientific report saying that it's most probably the ground currents that are killing the animals and making people sick as well, stray currents. Dave Setzer says there's nothing, no such thing as stray current. It's not by accident. It's because utilities are doing it to save copper, allowing some of the current to go back through the earth. And it's a dangerous thing that France forbids since 1989. In Quebec, if you have metal plumbing, so in cities, and when the water main coming into your home is metal, the electrician nearly always does the grounding of the main electrical panel on the plumbing. And there was actually a press reporter, one of my heroes. He was the environment and health reporter. He was in the investigations with all the corruption in the construction agency. He was president of my professional federation of journalists, André Noël. He invited me to his home to measure electromagnetic fields, and we found high currents on the water main in his house. And Robert Cavett found that, you know, if you've got current in the ground and current in the piping, even if it's microcurrents, well, it's going to go to materials in your home and even to wood and ceramics and metals, of course, in your house. And you can get really direct conduction of current into your body. And it was linked directly by IEEE scientists and EPRI scientists to childhood leukemia. That may be the smoking gun causing the link between electricity and child cancer. This is very serious stuff. And Dave Setzer is really worldwide one of the authorities, and I recommend highly that you download this report by Dave. And he's just saying, you know, the electrical grids are outdated since the electronics and energy efficient devices have arrived since the 70s. The wires and the whole grid, the transformers aren't updated to deal with the harmonics and the higher frequencies. So there's too much pressure, let's say, as in a hose, when it leaves your home, the electricity has to go back to the local substation, but the neutral on which the return current, unbalanced current, has to travel, well, sometimes it's just too much, and it goes down your ground and into the ground, and it's all over the place. Even the high tension power lines do that. They send a lot of this trash, which can travel hundreds or thousands of kilometers in the ground. It's really a big, big problem. And the IEEE and all that, they take care of this often to protect. They protect the electronic devices. The industry wants to, and all industries want to protect their equipment, but health of people, plants, and animals, they don't really care. The utilities don't care of it, but the electronic industry does. I also recommend that you download the course slides. Polyroux gives maybe the only course in toxicology of EMFs at the Faculty of Medicine. And this is the latest version, 2021. So he talks about currents in there very quickly. Transformers grounded to the ground. And these ground rods are stolen very often. So there's a problem right there because copper sells for a lot of money. So a lot of the poles aren't even, a lot of the transformers aren't even grounded. And it's costing millions of dollars to fix. And the supply of the electrical power to load needs two wires. And utilities realized early on that the 2 wires could be substituted by an earth connection, the second one. And all of the earth is not extremely conductive. It has extremely large volumes, and metal spikes are planted into the ground. And so they save a lot of money by using less copper instead of having larger neutral current wires for the return current. And of course, the idea of grounding is just to protect against electric shocks of people dying. But now they just shifted the vocation of these grounds. It's not normal that current goes down all the time, and it's causing a lot of corrosion also all over the place. So it's a big, big problem. Even cell towers are causing corrosion, and that's it. If it causes damage to the equipment, then they're going to act. But if it's harming people, we don't really care. So I recommend you go see what Magda has produced in this area. So this is an example of a measurement. Here, my Gauss meter is right on the metal pipe, and I'm measuring nearly 50 milligauss. So of course it goes down to the square of the distance, but let's say you have a bed a foot away, for sure you're above 10 milligauss. So it's a problem. And the solution is to transfer the ground on metal grounds, as we do in rural areas where you don't have an aqueduct, municipal water mains. But after doing that, and this is a job for electricians and plumbers because it's dangerous. There's low current, microcurrents on the pipes. So once it's done, once the ground is shifted, the plumber has to saw the water main. And sometimes there are literally sparks because there's so much electricity going there. And then they put a section of plastic, which is a dielectric union. And that prevents the current coming from your neighbors from coming in to your home and causing magnetic fields. And so I did an article about this many years ago. And this lady was telling me that, doing the homework or what have you with her daughter very close to this radiator, she had an intolerable disagreement or discomfort, and she had chronic insomnia, which disappeared after applying this solution that I just described. And Dr. Carpenter was saying there's little doubt that at the time he thought maybe up to 80% of childhood leukemia cases are linked to residential magnetic fields. Now, nobody knows. Some people say it's 10%, but even if it's 10 or 20%, it's too much because it's something we can fix very easily. It's not too expensive. And I'm very proud also to have convinced here on the left the Quebec Corporation of Master Plumbers and Heating Contractors to publish an article by Stéphane Bielinski, who is Quebec's local building biologist, who was originally trained by Andrew Mikrowski when I was organizing Andrew's course in Montreal. And Stéphane told me he wanted to make a career out of this, doing measurements in homes and mitigation. And I said, well, you must go to the US, get your building biology training, which he did about 15 years ago. And he did about, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 inspections. And he was SLT's top distributor in Canada. And since the COVID pandemic, well, he lost about 80% of his business. People are elsewhere these days, unfortunately. So we informed plumbers, and here on the right, we informed electricians with the Quebec Corporation of Master Electrician, an article by Andrew Mikrowski on stray current, even though it's not really stray, unless you have wiring errors. It's voluntary, but it's really, they don't, you know, the electricians won't blame the Hydro-Quebec. They don't want to be fighting with Hydro, but we all know it's really, the big problem is on the utility side. So this is an article that we did, as I said, about this chap who's really sick and he's fighting, and he basically lost his appeal to the Energy Board was rejected twice, his complaint. And one of the things, as I mentioned, we can do is measure body voltages. And this is something that Stéphane Bielinski did, and an example in my office. And one of the solutions, and it's a bit controversial, but can be highly effective. Here we show a grounding mat. And you can go see the Earthing Institute website. Just in a nutshell, the ground, if you're barefoot in the ground on in wet grass or in the sea, you're going to get free electrons, which are anti-inflammatory. So that's basically what it does. And there's lots of research on this, started by Clint Ober and Stephen Sinatra. God bless his soul, was a cardiac specialist. And body voltage is an issue. You know, we mentioned the contact currents linked to leukemia. Here, they ground newborns in hospitals. And I think it's a shame that they have wireless all over in most hospitals, not in Cyprus and other areas. Here it's Stéphane putting metal mesh under my mattress. I have an all-natural bed with a latex mattress. But one thing we forgot is that I have 220 volt cable under my bed between a thermostat and my heating system. So I did have electric fields, even when all the 110 is shut off. So he just plugged this ground. You see the little white box. So the electric fields are diverted directly to the ground. Now, when you do body grounding, you have to be very careful, and I recommend you do it with a building biologist to make sure you're not electrifying your body. Make sure all the wiring is okay and there's nothing coming back through the ground. Your ground has to be perfectly clean, even outside. The best thing is to plant a spike outside. But even in the ground, if you're close to the pole and transformer, there may be current going in the ground. So you could have a dirty ground there too. And this is Robert Steller, who was saying, be very, very careful, consult an expert. And his colleague, Ora Miller, also a building biologist and who does the EMF teaching. He trains future EMF inspectors. So his experience with earthing has been positive. Most of his clients have felt better, but you have to be careful. Some users do it doesn't work for everyone, and there can be a lot of different conditions. So be careful with these miracle solutions. You know, got to be very prudent, of course, when you're dealing with electricity. So I recommend you read all of this later, but he does have clients who are electrically sensitive who has some discomfort using the earthing mat. Now, in the news, and time is about to run out already, so I'm going to go very quickly, but this is one of the slides that you must show. You know, this is the Swedish and Norwegian and Nordic, Denmark also. It's very clear. Symptoms disappear in non-electrical environments. Those countries recognize chemical and electromagnetic sensitivities. So as many of you know, child leukemia, magnetic fields were classified possibly carcinogenic in 2002. And this is a great paper you should download if you're interested in chemical sensitivities. It was organized by the Department of National Defense, where I met Dr. Jerry Ross from Halifax, who was a doctor who became chemically sensitive. I'm going to go pretty quickly because I do see time is flying, and we have many years to show. So basically, I'm going to tell you to read my slides later. But as I mentioned, Luce Lesson knows the real stuff that most reporters don't know. You know, the WHO EMF project was financed by utilities. When they publish stuff, they consult utilities. It was headed by Mike Repacoli, who's a former Health Canada scientist who did a study finding that cell radiation causes cancer in rats, and then he became a consultant for utilities. He founded ICNIRP, who proposed the thermal RF exposure limits, which we all know are bogus. These are the first 3 studies showing the links with cancer, including Repacoli's. So, you know, it's the Air Force, it's solid stuff. And unfortunately, I was, after 15 years, this was my last article for La Presse, which the management did not like, where I learned soon after they spent $40 million in their wireless application. They stopped printing the paper, and people read it on iPads. Everyone from children to grannies put the iPad on their lap and they read La Presse, you know. So I can understand why one of the bosses, when I met him in the elevator one day, I just told him, I just sold you an article about EMFs. And he said, oh yeah, that's bullshit. So that's how reporters deal with news that bothers them. They just say it's bullshit. They don't bother looking into it. So they're human. What can I tell you? And but it's important stuff because most homes in Quebec are heated with electricity. So we really have high levels of magnetic fields, among the highest in the world. And here it's someone from the Public Health Institute saying, yeah, well, there are studies linking magnetic fields to leukemia, cardiovascular, and neurodegenerative diseases and miscarriages. So this is really important stuff. Historic articles, but you're not seeing too many of those anymore in the mass media. So as we know, 2 to 3% of people cannot work and live in modern buildings with all the wireless. Magda estimates it's about 35% who are moderate, because with dirty electricity, when they filtered, about a third of students and teachers felt better. And Bevington in the UK says it's, and surveys show that about 1 out of 10 people 10% of people worldwide have linked symptoms to exposure to EMF. So it's really serious stuff. And I guess it's going to help the activism because more and more people are taking this seriously. But then I learned from Magda and Jerry Flynn that, the science goes back to, the invention of electricity and mostly the Second World War. And afterwards, and there were, these rulings in 1982, the Supreme Court. But Magda has all the military papers, thanks to Bob Conley, who created her website. So these are, I send this all the time. You know, it's the U.S. Marine linking. Just they did a summary of all the Soviet papers, 1969, and here the U.S. Department of Health. So all the symptoms that radar operators had. Well, no, unfortunately, maybe 1 out of 10 people have them. Thanks to Meg, we have this important report, which of course the Human Rights Commission does not associate itself directly. When people file complaints to the Human Rights Commissions in Quebec and Canada, provinces, they recognize the handicap, but there was, to my knowledge, no accommodation, and no case went to the tribunal yet. So we're looking forward to seeing those. But people react to weather changes. It's the same symptoms, and it's been going on forever since humans exist. So it's no coincidence. We're all electrically sensitive, more or less. And I don't know if you knew, but Dr. Brundtland herself is electrosensitive. Magda invited her to Waterloo University. And in 2002, she was fired as head of the World Health Organization after telling reporters that she reacts to cell phone radiation hidden in your pocket or purse at the end of the room, in the same room where she was. And it was Mike Repicoli who got her fired. And one of my favorite sections of the Bioinitiative website is Cindy Sage's color slides about the different health effects in all the different studies according to the intensity of your exposure. Now you need conversion tables because here it's in centimeters squared. So you have to go to the SLT or other websites for conversion tables to get it to microwatts per square meters, which we often use with the meters. And I was really happy to meet Libby Kelly and all the building biologists in 2008. And this was really an important finding by Henry Lai, who is also on the Bioinitiative website. Henry keeps the research on EHS up to date, so do have a look at those. But what in this article mentions that he looked at the financing. So 70% of industry finance papers, studies conclude that RF-EMFs are not dangerous, and 70% of independently financed papers find that cell phone radiation is dangerous. Here it's the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. They do not adopt legislation, they make recommendations, but this is really important because they recommended 0.6 volts per meter and eventually, ideally, 0.2 volts per meter. But unfortunately now with 5G, it's going to be impossible. They're, instead of lowering the limits, exposure limits, they're raising them. But 0.6 volts per meter, I have a slide later on. I'm sorry, I have a conversion slide later. But I moved with just to be chronological, one of my heroes, Samuel Milham, who is very sick. We're all praying for him today. But he was, you know, a solid scientist, a former chief epidemiologist at Washington State. So do read his book, really amazing stuff. And I see that I'm running out of time, so I will go quickly over these slides just to mention, you know, it depended on cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Really, the increase followed the level of electrification in cities originally and up to 1950s, 40s in the rural areas. So 2011, possibly carcinogenic classification of RFs. And now they're about to reanalyze the most recent data, but unfortunately now they packed the IR committee, Dr. Anthony Miller told me that IARC was always independent from the politics of who, but now it seems that unfortunately we're going to have a dirty reevaluation because there are people from ICNIRP and under industry scientists involved. Can I have maybe another 5 minutes, Shelley, before questions?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, that would be fine.
Yeah, because people need to share these slides. The American Academy of Pediatrics saying the RF exposure limits are not adequate. They do not protect children. So it's really important that they be changed, and they haven't done anything. But tribunals in Europe, in Italy, and France, things are moving. Taiwan moved 1,500 mass 2012. This is my website with my English section has tons of articles only on EMFs, and 99% of them. So there was this rebuttal by Dr. Carpenter, co-signed by 50 experts worldwide. I spent the summer on this. So this is the article that's most shared worldwide from my website. And so it's up to 3 meters that the smart meter can harm you. It can harm you above 3 meters, but people really react, according to this neurosurgeon. And a big problem is when you have several meters close to your bedroom, of course, or your living room, what have you. And unfortunately, there was about 100 municipalities in Quebec who want to protect people from smart meters, but Hydro-Quebec teamed up with public health, and this is the doctor from Hydro-Quebec. And above him, La Parole de Dieu is, the word of God. So I thought this photo was really great. When Hydro-Quebec tells you, you should not worry, and public health is behind you, behind him, people believe him, but it's actually bull. So I recommend everyone pay $85 for a non-communicating meter, and then $2.50 monthly, which to me is extortion. And they really lie to people because they talk about average exposure, saying the smart meter gives you 55 microwatts per square meter, but actually it's 2.5 times greater power, 2,500 milliwatts in terms of power. But the level of exposure here, these are with a safe and sound meter. You want to be in the green or flashing green. My house is always in the green, unless a Bluetooth turn kicks in, or by accident on my computer, I have to check it when my tinnitus starts acting up. But there was a study done at the Energy Board in Quebec. Stéphane Belinsky did measurements, and he found that the peaks, were 6,700 microwatts per square meter. You want to be always under 1,000 and ideally under 100. And so people that, this is 3 feet away, are regularly getting above 5,000 and sometimes up to 50,000 microwatts per square meter. So that's why you want to be several meters from your square meter, for your smart meter, or ideally no smart meter at all. And here was the conversion. You see 1,000 microwatts per square meter is the famous 0.6 volts per meter recommended by the European Council. And in Canada, one of the best sources is Katerina Gustavs, who's a building biologist in BC. Hello, Katerina. So yeah, I'm going to go quickly. This is just to say that it's politics, from one state to another, they have different exposure guidelines. And what meters can we use if we're general public with low budget? Well, if you have no budget, you buy only the one on the left, or the 3, the 60 hertz electric and magnetic, and the RFs, but it's not very accurate. So if you have $400, I recommend you buy the 2 meters on the right. And the Safe and Sound Pro model has all the digits, all the figures, if you want to know your exact exposure. This classic Safe and Sound only has a sound and colors. And this is a Quebec invention, the Smart Meter Guard, which blocks 98% of the radiation and still allows the meter to communicate with Hydro-Quebec. So a very interesting product for people who have to move very often. And, we have so many papers, this one out of Russia, saying we should be careful. And this is José Lévesque in Quebec, who's highly electrosensitive. He's a technician who cables homes. He's vice president of the Quebec Association of people with EHS, and he has different top quality air tube and adapters. You can plug in your cell phone if you have one, and tablet with an Ethernet cable, and turn off the Wi-Fi. And this may be the most important slide. As a cardiac specialist, I'm concerned approximately 20% of people have detrimental cardiac rhythm sensitive TMR. Dr. Scully, past president of the Canadian Cardiovascular Society. So do send this slide to all your physicians and politicians, please. And Dr. Bellepomme, I invited him to Montreal, so he sent back the elevator the following year in Brussels, where I met all the top-notch scientists, including Dr. Hardell. So in my YouTube channel, there's lots of these 5th Paris Appeal EHS MHS conference interviews I did, notably with Dr. Hardell. And he told me that he was one of the first scientists to do research on the cancer link with dioxin, PCBs, and Roundup. He was always right when he said, be careful, there's a cancer link, probable link. So he's really, and he's an oncologist, he treats people with cancer. So, you know, he's really an amazing scientist. And, you know, all these studies, cell towers, it should be ideally actually a kilometer away. Bill Ray, my hero. What causes, what triggers? A lot of people think it's mold, pesticides, electric shock. So many factors can trigger EHS. Dr. Belayev is probably the giant scientist I met in Brussels, and he told me all these bogus papers saying EHS does not exist, it's not caused by EMS. Well, they don't consider all the different factors which really have an impact on your protection or reaction to RF radiation. You take melatonin or ginkgo biloba. So I will try to conclude and invite you to to read all of my slides. This unfortunately was never applied, but there are countries out there. Thanks to the Environmental Health Trust, we can see all the different countries who are doing amazing stuff, such as France and Israel, which banned Wi-Fi. And thank you to Dr. Blank and his son, R. Blank. Jeremy Johnson, an amazing source. 1.6 million people viewed his TEDx talk on EHS. And hello, Rena, who came to Montreal and then invited me to her symposium at a distance at Women's College. And these, for your doctor, everyone has to send this to their physician, the European guidelines, diagnose and treat. And thanks to Wendy Mesley, CBC, talked about cell phone dangers. And one of the best books ever published, The History of Radio Wave Sickness by Arthur. Dr. Moskowitz is probably with the Environmental Health Trust, the champions keeping us daily up to speed at what's happening out there. And this was great because Cici Doucette, I don't know who convinced Linda Birnbaum, but this was at the National Institutes of Health. So this link has to be shared. It's really amazing that it was at the NIH, this symposium. And so this is what's going to happen since the 2018 Ramazzini and NTP studies prove that cancer can be caused by cell phone radiation. Their hypothesis was that it does not cause cancer. It did cause cancer in rats. This is a RENA symposium. And I covered the 2 EMF conferences as well, medical conferences. And there's even a city in Quebec which gives a subsidy if you lower EMFs. This is because they read my magazine. And this is progress. Also, the scientists in the US recognizing that it's probably microwaves are making the diplomats sick. You cannot insure, no insurer will cover EMFs, too high risk. And the most recent papers, well, this one is the update on the diagnosis by Dr. Bellepomme and all the scientists backing. It's not a direct link, but it's really red flags if you have all these symptoms. And this is the most recent paper that Mona Nilsson and Dr. Hardell published. So we're just starting to have scientific data about the health effects of 5G. Dr. Belayev told me there's about 100 papers actually concerning the millimeter wave health effects. If you're not in touch with Dr. Belayev, I highly recommend that you invite him as a speaker. And this is the kind of damage that focused rays can cause, not just to the vegetation. And one of my favorite books, voila. So that's it for my talk. I'm sorry if I overstayed.
No apologies needed, Andre. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive PowerPoint presentation that you shared with us. The accurate science, which clearly demonstrates the health effects that EMFs can have on our physiology. And I was personally surprised that Makrowski's study showed that only 5% of homes were below 1 milligauss. We appreciate your information about the sources of high levels of EMFs, including electrical panels, the distribution lines, and dirty electricity from wiring in the home. Your information about misinformation about smart meters and the mitigation using shielding cables and grounding plumbing, which can prevent leukemia from residential EMFs, has piqued our interest. And we are so grateful that you have given us permission to share your slides widely, which contain valuable information. We will stop recording now and